Welcome to the dungeon with Harlan and Andrew.
Hi, hello. Welcome.
Hey, welcome to the dungeon. I'm Andrew Orvedahl.
And I'm Harlan Kelly.
This is a show and podcast where we chat with game masters about running tabletop role playing games. And we often have special guests on the show, and they are all special to me. I've had a blast with all of them. But in today's episode, we have a truly special guest.
Truly special.
If there's some descriptor more than special, we have that level of guest. We have author Keith Ammann with us. He's the author of two different books. The most recently released Live to Tell the Tale, Combat Tactics for Player Characters, and The Monsters Know What They're Doing, which is also an amazing website that you can also check out. So welcome to the show, Keith. Thanks so much for doing it.
Thanks for inviting me.
As I've been telling all my friends, your book and blog, The Monsters Know What They're Doing, is definitely my favorite companion resource, other than obviously the published books, that have the adventures and monsters and stuff. Your book, I not only read it, front to back when I got it, but it's also just fun to read. I'll just sit down and pick like a random monster and just read about that monster again. So it's
A
it's
little
both,
bathroom reading.
yeah. Like I'll have breakfast and I'll be like, I'm just gonna bone up on undead creatures over breakfast. But
No pun intended.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's like
But
when I first started playing D&D with Andrew, it was like one of the first things he told me about or gave me was like, was your book? Yeah. And I didn't take it as an insult that he was the first time we played together. He's like, here's a strategy guide about how to run monsters better.
there you go. No, I think everyone could benefit from added knowledge, or even just a different perspective. Maybe somebody could read the book and be like, well, I like the way that I run my goblins or something, but who knows. But anyway, thanks for doing the show. And if you're watching, definitely check out Keith's books and his website for sure. I had one question off the top of my head that I wanted to ask first. Normally we ask our guests about their history with tabletop role-playing games, but since you kind of discuss your history with role-playing games in the foreword of your book, people can just buy your book and read it, and they can find out that way. So we can just skip past that question. But I was just wondering, of all the monsters in your blog and in your book, is there a single monster that stands out to you as being the most difficult to step inside of and like see their point of view? Because that's what I mean. You're so good at jumping into the monsters and kind of figuring out how they would behave. Was there one that stuck out?
Yeah. I will, and I think I'm not the only one who has this issue because far and away the post that I've written that has gotten the most hits historically, and it's never even been a close contest,
Oh, wow.
has been my original post on hag tactics.
Oh, boy, I love hags.
And yeah, I clearly am not the only one who has a difficult time figuring out how to run hags, and that I think is definitely one. I have not made extensive use of hags. I made no use of hags at all before I started playing fifth edition, and even since playing fifth edition, I think I've used uh, a green hag coven in one combat encounter that I wrote. It was an on the road encounter. It wasn't main story. And then in our Tomb of Annihilation campaign, there was a random encounter with some sea hags. And aside from that, I haven't made extensive use of hags as villains, and they definitely are a little hard for me to step inside, um, because they are schemers, but they're also kind of weird and fey, and I think it's a delicate balancing act to try to figure out how malicious they should be versus how approachable they should be, because if they're nothing but malicious, you just don't want to go near them in the first place, and you avoid having the encounter at all. So if you're writing hags into your story, then the PCs have to have some kind of motivation for wanting or needing to interact with the hag, and then figuring out what the hag is going to want from them, or a group of hags. It's tough. It requires a lot of creativity, I think, and willingness to willingness to go to some wild places.
Yeah, I love that post. I've read it specifically because I'm a huge fan of just like the flavor of hags, I think, and but I totally agree that I've run them a couple times, and it's mechanically difficult. And I think you have that post is amazing, because it talks pretty in depthly about that. But
I just recently had a little mini story arc with hags in a game. The one thing I liked with hags that is just so unsettling is them like grooming children to do bad things. So I kind of leaned into that, and it was like a mystery in this village of like, why are these kids like pushing old people down the stairs and like stealing and shit. And so that was kind of just fun to just kind of let that mystery play out. But then once the players knew it was a hag work, they 100% hag hatred. They didn't want to like negotiate with them. They didn't want to talk with them. They just wanted to exterminate them. But yeah, it was tricky too. And one of maybe all the hags, but there's definitely one hag that's like size large, and she's like super strong. She's like more, I kind of just imagine them more like
Anna's
witches,
hag.
but yeah, that's the one. And but yeah, she's just like this brute. And so yeah, it took some reconfiguring of my imagination. Like even while we were playing, I was like, oh no, wait, she's huge. She's like taking up so much space, and she's like throwing you around. So
they're so
they
deceitful
are weird.
too. There's this really good one shot that Deborah Wall ran for the I can't remember.
I watched that one, and I knew the twist as soon as it came out of her mouth because I had used it too.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah.
And I was and so when toward the end of that, when she says something that kind of gives away the game, and you hear Matt Mercer go, "Oh no."
Yeah.
He says it just like that.
I know exactly what,
Yeah, because that was the moment he realized what was going on. Either that, or he knew it all along and was just doing the actor thing.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's great. Well, so like I think one of the things you do so well in your book that it just immediately sucked me in with, because I'm not a huge tactics guy. Like I don't think I'm very. It's not my strong suit. I want to do it because I want to challenge players that way. But a thing I really love about your book is that all of the utilization of tactics for the monsters that you recommend are so based in what is unique about the monster. And really, I think it allows tactics to build out the flavor of a monster, because like, if a beholder can fly, it should be flying up and be hard to get to because of that, or what, like whatever it is, it makes the thing that the creature has more dangerous and more flavorful. So like,
yeah, and it's paranoid, so it kind of sticks itself where you would put a security camera,
yes,
where it can see everything.
Yeah, exactly. And see, those are the things that I love about your book, is that it doesn't sacrifice the flavor and the story of this. Like really, I wish I could quote it exactly, but you talk about it in the foreword about how all of these monsters have survived this long using the things that they have, right. So they would use it really well.
Totally. Yeah. I think the best takeaway I got from your your book, like I knew in theory, like, oh yeah, like enemies can retreat, but like my enemies were sticking around because I knew that the party wanted to fight to the death and that. And so one of the best takeaways just overall from your book was like intelligent enemies, not always obviously, but if they have that intelligence, when they're hurt bad enough, they would want to leave. They want to survive and they're going to leave. And so just incorporating a thing like that in my games has definitely elevated it for sure.
Do you have anything that, like, as you were writing the book or as you've been like writing more and more entries on your blog, that has surprised you about a monster, that like maybe something you've run for a long time, but as you're doing this delicate work of like focusing on what makes a monster good, like just like a little something that you like discovered or thought of yourself or anything?
Yeah, there are a lot of creatures that I feel like I didn't fully understand until I began analyzing them. The goblins, the very first post I wrote, that was a process of discovery, very much like that. Just taking that first very close granular look at the stat block and finally realizing exactly what nimble escape does.
Yeah.
And it shapes everything.
Yeah.
It shapes everything about the goblins. It is absolutely what makes them unique and distinguishes them from kobolds or orcs or any other kind of cannon fodder humanoid you're going to run into. One that I really uh, I really enjoyed for the book. This one is not on the blog. It's only in the book.
Oh boy.
Writing the entry for the Zorn. And realizing just some of the dirty tricks that a Zorn can pull. And Zorn are not hostile by nature. They want what they want. They're going to try to get it from you, but they're not necessarily going to try to attack you to get it. They're just going to try to get at the stuff in your possession and take it if they can. And there's only a fight if you try to stop them from doing it. But some of the things that they're being able to move through Earth allows them to do is just more fun than it has a right to be. The Lamia, I remember, had some its combination of features and traits had some deep implications and led to what one of my favorite sentences of my own that I've ever written, which is that it's easier to punch someone after fooling them has failed than it is to fool them after punching them has failed.
Yeah.
I'm proud of that.
That's so good. Oh, I love
that's wisdom that I think a lot of players could benefit from.
I can't wait to go back over those and look at those entries too now, because those are monsters I don't think I've ever run, but I've always seen and been fascinated by in the monster manual. It's oh, I will do that. And so yeah, I'm excited to kind of pour over those stat blocks now, and your entries of them.
Totally. I was curious about this. Like a lot of creative output in the Dungeons and Dragons world gets a lot of feedback from people, a lot of critical, no, that's not. And I was just curious, with your blog and book, do you get a lot of user critique? Do people present their own?
Do you get heckled?
Yeah, I get a fair amount, and a lot of it is totally legit. I try to maintain an intellectually honest culture in the comments of my blog. If somebody points out a mistake, I not only say, "Oh, you're right. Thanks for catching the mistake," but I will actually leave the mistake in the blog post struck out with my correction right after it, because I feel like this is an ongoing learning process in which we're all learning from one another. And if somebody is leaving differing viewpoints on the blog and they're not being rude about it, I absolutely am gonna leave that there, and sometimes I will actually edit the posts after the fact to reflect that new information. Um, the one place where I've really dug in my heels is on certain aspects relating to stealth and facing, and in the rules as written, in the default rules, there is technically no facing. But as a DM, you can implement facing in certain ways as you see fit. It's an optional rule in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and so if you look at the way hiding is handled, uh, and it's complicated by the fact that in the first printing of the player's handbook, and maybe subsequent printings too, I don't know, a crucial phrase was left out. In the first printing, it says you can't hide from a creature that can see you. In subsequent printings, it was you can't hide from a creature that can see you clearly. And then there's also the matter of whether you can be hidden and then approach someone and remain hidden as you approach them and still gain unseen attacker advantage, even though technically you're within their line of sight. And the player's handbook basically says the DM may decide that there are certain cases in which this can be done. And my hard and fast rule, which I think most people would agree with, is that if you're heavily obscured the whole time, you can stay hidden right up to when you clock them on the head. And if you're trying to approach an alert guard across an open plaza in broad daylight, you don't have a chance. You are spotted as soon as you come out into the open. But between those, there's a lot of gray area. And in my entry on the Phase Spider, which has Ethereal Jaunt, which allows it to just appear and disappear into and out of the ethereal plane as a bonus action. One of the things I allow it to do is appear directly behind someone, make a stealth roll to see if it was able to do that silently, and if so, then you didn't spot it and it gets its unseen attacker advantage.
Ooh.
And that really torqued off quite a few readers. Actually, their point of view was there is no facing in D&D, and as soon as they appear in the material plane, you see them. My point of view is just like general rules always apply unless a specific rule applies, common sense always applies unless a rule overrides it. You don't need a rule in the game to tell you that humanoids have 2 arms.
Yeah.
No one is going to say, oh, my character holds this in his first arm, this in his second arm, and this in his third arm. Well, the rules don't say I can't have 3 arms. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on. So my common sense, I think, position is that people don't have 360-degree panoramic vision. And the lack of facing reflects the fact that you're constantly looking around, not the fact that you can actually see everything around you all the time. And so if a creature just literally appeared in your plane of existence and bit you in the back of the head, as the very first thing it did, I think there should be a chance that you didn't see that coming.
Yeah, and that's terrifying, and that's the way that should be.
But I think that is the thing that has created the most arguments. And I've basically just said, listen, this is my position, and I'm sticking with it. And you know, you can argue otherwise, but I think that the latitude that DMs are given within the rules as written are enough to justify this when paired with common sense. Um, the only other, I think, real uh, place where I've just said, yeah, you disagree, you have a reason for disagreeing, but here are my reasons, and I'm not changing it. Um, is whether a Yugoloth has to be native to Gehenna. As it affects where they are permanently destroyed and where they just go splat and reform later. I think that because of their neutral evil alignment, the more natural plane for them to be attached to is Hades. But you know, I mean,
That's some
this
deep
one is a
lore.
lot more academic than the Phase Spider one, and there's lore supporting the Gehenna origin, and I just choose to ignore it.
I love
Nice.
that. I love the minutia of that so much, because that is just where my brain goes to. Like I want to keep going down that wormhole all the time, and so I appreciate that.
Definitely. A question we ask a lot of game masters is, do they have any tips or strategies for sort of streamlining combat? Because a lot of new people to D&D, they complain that the combat is a slog, and even veteran people who play D&D are like, man, that took forever. And one great thing in your newest book, Live to Tell the Tale, which I've not totally finished. I'm trying to read through it as a player and not as a DM who's like, now I'll know the best
Beginner's
way
mind,
that every class. So I'm just trying to actually, in the games I'm in, I'm like, okay, I'll read like the stuff that pertains to the games I'm a player and not just try to get that forbidden knowledge. But you have this great part about standing decisions and situational decisions, which that alone so helpful, and something that I will impart to new players, certainly. That basically means like there's standing decisions, and that's a decision that you can make outside of combat, and you just know that you'll do that when the situation arises. And then there's situational decisions where you do. Do you have any other?
Well, and that's an explicit articulation of something that has implicitly always been part of both the blog and the Monsters Know What They're Doing the book, which is the more decisions that you can make before the game session begins, the fewer you have to make in the heat of the moment, and the more mental resources you have available for making other decisions and keeping track of other things, because a DM's got to keep track of a lot. And so the fewer things that you have to decide at the table, the better. If you can come up with a set of rules for yourself that tell you when this situation crops up, this is the action you take. If you've got those rules already worked out, then you don't have to be making a judgment call every turn that you're running something, whether it's a monster as the DM or a character as the player. And and that goes for players too. The more of the work you do outside the game session, the less of it you have to do in the game session, and the less susceptible you are to analysis paralysis. So I have probably at least a third of my prep is just doing those little things for myself so that I don't have to do them in the session. If I'm running an adventure with a random encounter table, I'm always rolling on that table, but I am never rolling on that table during the game session.
Yeah.
I always roll for random encounters during prep, and then determine what's going to happen, how many creatures there are, and then I just say, okay, this is no longer random. This is happening. This is going to happen at this point. It's going to involve these creatures, and I'm going to look up my own tactics for myself. And what did I say about these things? Okay, this is what I'm going to do with these monsters. So that by the time the game comes around, I have an approximate script, and I just have to follow it, and I don't have to roll. I don't have to be surprised by what comes up. I don't have to look it up in a book or on D&D Beyond. I in my notes, I have already got the start of a hit point tally for each one. I've written down HP 38 for creature 1, creature 2, creature 3, creature 4, and then I'm just going to track each one, subtracting as I go. NPCs, I always keep a list of NPCs of every folk and every ethnicity of that folk. And if, what's this guard's name? Pick one off the list. It's already there. I don't have to just panic in the moment and call him Ed. What else?
Yeah, I mean,
I definitely, I definitely have as much scripted out as possible. Now, obviously, it's always going to be a rough script and malleable because it has to respond to player choices, and player choices are often unexpected. But when you are not you can have the players surprise you. What you shouldn't be doing is surprising yourself, or just letting the dice that you are rolling surprise you on things that you had the power to do before the session began.
Man, I mean, that is the biggest thing about reading your blog and book that changed the way I DM is I think I always viewed it before as I should know how the monster works, but like what it's doing, how am I supposed to know? But just the way you talk through some of like, okay, it would probably use its first action to do this, and probably use its second action to do this, and then its next turn to do this, is because of course it would know that, especially if it's an NPC. Of course it knows how it fights, and even if it's a monster, of course it knows kind of like
a mage
how it
knows how
them.
to be a mage.
Yeah.
A manticore knows how to be a manticore. And
And
another thing is if you're in a more enclosed setting, like a dungeon setting with multiple rooms, and you have creatures that might flee when they're wounded, or even maybe they flee right away when they sense danger. Know where they're going to flee to. Just have that planned out in advance. If these people flee, they go here. If these creatures flee, they go here. And then they tell these creatures what's going on. And then, you know that those creatures know, and they're going to react differently. I think one of the most interesting and entertaining aspects of any role-playing game, D&D or whatever, is playing the epistemology game. Who knows what?
Yeah.
And how are characters and creatures going to act on the differentials of knowledge between them? If A knows something that B doesn't, how is that going to make A act differently from B? And
I agree. It's just the most fun to ask a player, are you explicitly saying that like right now, or like are you saying that to that person, or just because it builds that tension, and then it does, it's changed campaigns for me. So yeah, I love that process. And the more you, just like you said, the more you do these mechanics, the more you have built out, when you do have to make a decision or you do have to react to something very specific that happens, I feel like for me, the weight is increased in the moment. I'm like, oh, okay, this is not an automatic thing. This character is actually having to make a choice right now, and I get to think about what it's processing it, it just builds out the flavor of the character. So it's awesome. Yeah.
Totally. We're running a little longer. I wanted to get a couple more questions before we get to our roll table of questions. Do you have a table rule that you implement that maybe obviously goes is contrary to rules as written, or anything that you would want to share? Just anything that you just utilize at your tables?
Um, Electrum and Platinum don't exist. Well, platinum coinage just flat out doesn't exist. Electrum coinage only exists where the technology doesn't exist to refine gold affordably. Or there's not enough gold in circulation to make coinage out of it. It's poor man's gold. I have a rule I call the sleep on it rule, which is that anytime you level, you have to complete a long rest before you gain the benefits. I think a lot of people use that rule, actually. I don't know if anyone else uses the same name for it that I do. I have a little formula I use. I almost always use Battle Grid. I do Theater of the Mind when I consider the terrain of a battle not to be particularly important. But most of the time I use a grid. And so I have a rule regarding diagonal movement, which is that you can move diagonally for just 5 feet of movement if the squares that you're moving between are both vacant, and you can only do it once, and after that you have to follow it by orthogonal movement. If you do diagonal twice in a row, the second diagonal costs 10 feet.
Ooh, man, that's awesome.
So it's yeah, it's trying to account for the fact that 30 feet orthogonal is not the same as 30 feet diagonal. So so you can do diagonal, horizontal, diagonal, vertical, diagonal, horizontal, diagonal, vertical, or diagonal, diagonal, but the second diagonal costs 10 feet. The math works out the same either way. I think that is about the extent of it. Aside from those things, I tend to stick to rules as written.
Nice.
I guess I mean, everyone's making their individual judgment calls on being able to approach while hidden. I guess you'd consider this a table rule. So if you're hidden and you're crossing, say, lightly obscured terrain to ambush someone, if it were heavily obscured, you could remain hidden the whole time, no problem. If you weren't obscured at all, you just simply can't do it. They see you. But if you're lightly obscured, I require one more stealth check just to see whether you can cover that distance without being noticed.
Man,
Nice.
I love all those because they're really focused on reality. Like it seems like that's pretty important to you in your games. Is that like
and you know, there's always the people who say you're gonna freak out over realism in a game with aerodynamically impossible flying dragons and you know, things like that. I have always been more of a fan of anchored fantasy than wild-eyed wahoo fantasy, and I have also played with people who have unbelievably fertile and original imaginations, and I am a creative person, but I am not creative in that way. And so when I'm trying to impress other people, rather than doing it through sheer originality, I try to make the lived-in world feel as real as it can. I go for verisimilitude. And that is a large part of my motivation behind writing the blog, The Monsters Know What They're Doing, because I want a battle with orcs to feel like a battle with orcs. And I don't want it to feel exactly like a battle with lizard folk or a battle with gnolls. I want every single one of those to feel different. Um, and for and for people to get immersed in that experience. And so
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. That you are, you know, just the way you spoke about your creative focus and the way you bring something unique to the table. That's really really cool.
yeah, and because of that, I'm a little, I say a little, my players would say very stingy with allowing purchases of magical items over the counter. Um, because I feel like magic should be magical. It should be rare. It should be hard to get your hands on. Um, it should impress even the person who's carrying it around. And so my point of view is if you want to acquire a magic item that you didn't just find while adventuring, you're going to need to have it custom made for you. You're going to need to find someone who's able and willing to make it, and you're going to have to wait a while they get it done. You can't just walk into Bob's Magic Shop and buy one of the bags of holding off the hook that holds four of them. You know, that's some people love that. That's never going to happen in one of my games.
I have a quick rules question before we get to the roll table, because this has been driving me nuts, and by extension, I've been driving everyone I can talk to about it nuts. So I would love your opinion on it.
Are you gonna bring
then
up
I
twinning?
will be silent. Then I will be
Rules
silent on
court.
it forever.
Are you bringing up twinning right now? Are we gonna talk about
Yes,
twinning? Oh
I'm
my
going
gosh,
to
I love it.
And you don't have to answer this right away if you're not even familiar with all this stuff. But in your opinion, is it legal to twin an ice knife spell, given the rules as written with twinning spells?
Oh God, I'd have to look up the specifics.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I put you on the spot there. This is something that I
Yeah.
have been tormenting everyone about, because I love to do it. I've played with other sorcerers
Did you say
who love to
eyesight
do
or
it.
did you mean eye bite?
Ice knife,
Ice
sorry.
knife.
Oh, ice knife.
Ice knife, because it
Okay.
targets only one enemy, but then it explodes and it does incidental damage to whoever's around,
He's stuck on
allies
the
or
incidental.
enemies.
He's stuck on the
Yeah, I'm like,
incidental.
it doesn't target other enemies. It only targets one enemy, and then it explodes, and it just so happens if there's other enemies around, they get hurt. So it should be able to be twinned, because in the language of twinning it, it says it can only target one enemy, and the ice knife only targets one enemy, and then it just happens to explode and do that damage.
Okay. By analogy, I know that Jeremy Crawford has said with respect to things like the Beastmaster's shared spells, where if you cast a spell on yourself, you can cast it on your beast simultaneously. It affects both of you. For my own purposes, I've been doing a deep dive into Beastmasters, trying to figure out how to get the best use of them. And Jeremy Crawford has said that if you're trying to duplicate a spell that affects yourself, it cannot have an area effect component. The target must be either self or a single creature target, and you happen to be casting it on yourself. And the other requirement is that it cannot have an AOE component, because what was the one I was specifically wondering about? It was a spell that did conical damage, and I was trying to figure out, since the target was technically yourself, could you spray out a cone of damage, and could your beast also spray out a cone of damage? And the answer is no. the AOE component invalidates it. So that might also invalidate Ice Knife. But I
And
would
that
have
was
to-
Jeremy Crawford that said, no, you cannot twin Ice Knife, which sent me
Oh,
into
it was Jeremy Crawford.
into my death spiral of trying to justify it because it's so much fun.
But he did. But he had he had at least a basic rule behind it, which is no
You have to
AOE.
factor that in.
So,
Yeah.
you know.
It's been very fun to talk
Um,
about.
Harlan, do you have any last questions before we get to the roll table? And then
no,
if you're
let's-
watching on stream, if you have questions, we'd love your questions.
Let's
as
hop
well.
to the roll table because there's 2 really good questions.
Okay, great.
In chat.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Keith, just rolling a d20. We have a little table of questions.
Oh, I didn't know I needed to have one handy.
Oh, sorry. I can roll for you.
Luckily,
if you
I do. Luckily, I
nice.
do. I just hadn't
I
taken
think
it
every
out.
guest has.
But
yeah.
see, it's going to be the one I have handy is a metal one, so it's going to be loud as hell on my
All right,
desk.
I'm excited about
That's
it.
all right.
That is a 15.
Ooh,
15.
15.
Oh, okay. I like this question. Do you have tone expectations for your players? Like, for example, do you let them use anachronisms and things like that, or is there just like a general understanding of like
You
the
can have
tone?
expectations, but they won't be met. Players are going to set the tone they want to set.
Yeah, that's a very
and
good
different
answer.
players will set different tones, and if those tones clash, that's something for them to negotiate with one another. I don't have the only way I can communicate an expectation of tone is to use a tone myself and hope that people pick up on it and reflect it back at me. And I'm okay with that. And often the nature of the adventure itself will push a tone in a certain direction. If you're playing Tomb of Annihilation or Curse of Strahd, things are going to be a little bit more serious overall. If you're playing Acquisitions Incorporated, obviously everything's going to be loopy. So I don't worry about it too much, and I've been very fortunate to play at tables where people are not trying to do the edgelordy thing of seeing how much they can be jerks to other people and get away with it. I fortunately have not been burdened with that. I've had good groups that got along, that had a sense of how to keep the game fun, and so I don't worry too much about tone. Ultimately, the game is as much the player's game as it is mine. I define the problems. I define the setting and the environment, but how they choose to respond to that is up to them.
Yeah, that's the thing we've talked about on here before, is that
great.
the myth that the dungeon master is just totally in control and is like you're just following their story.
Yeah. And for many years, one of my personal rules has been treat sensitive topics with sensitivity. So there are things that are never going to come up in my games, period. There are things that if they come up, they're going to be treated with kid gloves, or simply kept off screen, or restricted to backgrounds rather than the gameplay itself. Just it's got to be. You can't be dropping stuff on people that is probably not going to be fun.
Yeah.
Because that's not what the game is about. It is about having fun. That's what games are. If you're not having fun with a game, it's time to stop playing.
Yeah, I know. That's I've seen a couple DMs talk about
Or
this
find other
recently.
people to play it with. My law of gaming is play any given game with people who take it approximately as seriously as you do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good rule for sure.
I've seen DMs talk about it recently too of just like it's just okay to not whatever that thing that you think you need to do is for whatever reason. It's okay to just not do it. Like it's okay to not play for a little bit if you all are feeling burnt out. It's okay to we Andrew and I were playing at a home game the other day, and the monster that was like crawled out of the cave was a spider, and one of our players was like, "Look, she was like creeped out, and
I'd
then
never seen that before.
and
Yeah.
it transitioned into like really if it would be okay, I just have a hard time like talking about spiders. And so it was a fun challenge for me, like cool, let's take a break, I'm just gonna change out the same CR monster like that will have a similar effect, it's that was a fun challenge for me. It's just okay.
Yeah,
to
I've never seen that happen before with an encounter where it's like I'm just not comfortable with this type of enemy, and it was like, but yeah, it worked out.
and
in
it,
the
yeah
end.
and it just wasn't a problem for us to switch. It was okay. Yeah.
That reminds me actually of a couple of other things that I do in my games, which I don't know if they would count as table rules. They more fall under just the way I do things. Um, when I am starting a new campaign, um, I give the players what I call the zoning code for character creation. Because I believe very strongly that bounded creativity, by and large, produces better results than unbounded creativity. And so I will give the players a list of character creation parameters. These are the things that are automatically allowed. You don't need my permission to do them. You can just choose from this list, shove it in my face, and say, this is what I'm playing. And I will say, great, okay. This is the list of things that you need to run past me before you choose them. And this is the list of things that are not going to be allowed. And they vary from game to game. For example, in my Curse of Strahd game, uh, I actually allowed lawful evil and neutral evil characters, which I normally don't. Um, under in that game, they were special uses under the zoning code. And then, oh shoot, I've forgotten the other one that I thought of. Was something that you mentioned that made me think of it, and I'm blanking on it now, but I'll bring it up again if it occurs to me.
Yeah, do it. There's more questions in the chat. People are wanna talk to you, so I'm gonna keep rolling along if that's okay. Another good one I saw from our mod in the chat, Ted, is he wants to know how do you feel about the flexibility of 5e rules as opposed to some of the older editions? Do you feel like there's more leeway? Is that more fun? Is there anything you miss about older rules?
So, because you skipped over my background now, I need to explain this. I got my start with AD&D.
Uh-huh.
I had just barely dipped my toe in the waters of second edition before Shadowrun caught my eye, and I just dove into that for several years and played Shadowrun almost exclusively. And then there was a number of years when I didn't have anyone to play RPGs with at all, so I just didn't. Then I got back together with some old friends and played GURPS for a while. And we were playing fantasy under GURPS, but we were playing GURPS. And then my wife asked me to run a campaign for her and some coworkers just shortly after 5e had been released. And so that was when I got my first taste of that system. I never experienced 3rd edition or 3.5 or 4th edition. I have nothing useful to say about those editions, but in terms of how approachable 5e is as a system is versus how approachable AD&D was, no contest. 5e is vastly superior, and it's full of these elegant little distillations. Um, Being able to treat attack rolls, saving throws, and ability checks all fundamentally the same way. Having that proficiency modifier that increases as you get better and is applied to all the things you're good at. Advantage and disadvantage, the systematic nature of conditions. All of these appeal tremendously to my brain, which craves regularity and just loves to see these things consistently applied and certain principles applied in parallel over here and over here and over here. I just think that for what D&D is, fifth edition is just about the best way they could have done it. Now, D&D is and will always be fundamentally a strictly class and level based high fantasy game. And any attempt to try to make it something other than that is going to hit a brick wall. But if that's what you want to play, I think D&D 5th edition has done it very, very well, and particularly well as a gateway game.
I love that. I love that. That's such a clear. I agree. You know, you're a person with a job, and you have skills, and there are rules to how you do it. I love it.
Just out of curiosity, just a real quick question: are there any other games that you're playing right now other than D&D?
You know, I honestly don't really have the time. There are ones that I would be delighted to explore if I could.
What is it? What's the top one that you're kind of like in your brain? You're like, ooh, I want to do it. I want to start a game like that.
I don't want to rub people the wrong way by like naming one,
Sure.
and then other people think, wait, what about this one?
Yeah. It's okay. I just want to know because I want to go look.
Yeah, and plus, honestly, I could name one, but I would probably be blowing smoke because even the one I named, I probably wouldn't know enough about it to say why I named that one.
Interesting.
Because I have a group of players. I play D&D with them. D&D is what they want to play, and that's, and I have just barely 98% of the time I need to prepare games for them, and I don't have time to play other stuff. It would require them to take a few weeks off from characters whose stories they've been telling for a long time, and they want to keep telling those stories. And so for now, this is what we're committed to.
Yeah.
But do I want to play nothing but D&D forever? No. Am I content to keep playing D&D for as long as it's making my players happy? Yeah, I am.
I like that.
One thing I would definitely like to do one of these days is just go back to GURPS for a while and see if I feel like after 5e it still holds up. Because I don't know. It might not.
I'm trying to learn GURPS right now, actually. I never used it.
I really liked it for a long time because it was giving me exactly the sort of game that I wanted. But I haven't played it in a while. I haven't played it with any of the people I'm playing with now. So who knows? My opinion might have evolved. But I will say, when I was talking about D&D being the place for a particular kind of game, here's a good example. Because GURPS character creation lets you take, and in that game they're called disadvantages, flaws, essentially, where you are imposing certain mechanical drawbacks on yourself for role-playing reasons, and then your choice to accept those drawbacks allows you some extra points to buy advantages, mechanical abilities with. Contrast that with D&D, where the idea of giving yourself any kind of mechanical penalty at all is absolutely anathema. Nobody wants a penalty. Orcs have, in Volo's Guide to Monsters, if you play an orc PC, you have a -2 to intelligence, and boy, do people hate that.
Yeah.
Nobody should ever have a minus. That is the D&D mentality. And part of that, I'm sure,
it's
is
not just that one's just not just mechanical, but
I mean, part of it is that no, there are other. Oh boy, are there other issues with how orcs and half orcs are depicted in
since the
5th
Tolkien
edition.
days.
That's
yeah.
But there are no other PC folk that I'm aware of that are given a numerical penalty on any of their ability scores. I might be flaking. There might be one other, but I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. The one that sticks in my mind is orcs.
Yeah.
Because I have done some things with orcs that are interesting to me, and they did not involve the Volo's orc.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea of voluntarily taking a mechanical penalty to your character in D&D, nobody wants to touch that. That's just not the kind of thing D&D players are here for. They want pluses. Give me the plus in this and the plus in that, and the ability to do this one extra thing. I think the worst thing you can do to a D&D player is cast slow on them.
Oh man, I can't wait to cast slow on
or send an
else.
intellect devourer after them and have it knock their intelligence down.
Oh boy, yeah. Or a ghost. Have him aged. I accidentally aged one of my old characters 10 years, and he went from being 60 to 70, and that's a jump.
Oh.
But in 5th edition, that's toothless. Like in AD&D, getting older actually came with some mechanical penalties. And in 5th edition,
you could be as old as you want.
In 5th edition, you don't even have to die when you get to the upper end of your age range. It's just like, no, I'm feeling fine. I can go out for one more adventure, sure.
Yeah,
totally.
I'm a 475-year-old dwarf, but I still got what it takes.
Totally. Well, Keith, you've been more than generous with your time.
Truly.
We had a special 1-hour episode here. Thank you so much. If you're watching or listening to this, definitely check out Keith's books, check out his blogs. They're super helpful and just a pleasure to read. So even if you're not going to use them, if you like D&D, I know you'll enjoy reading them.
It's very true.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being on the show.
And
Thank you
again for inviting me.
Harlan and I are part of a Spelljammer campaign that we play every Monday night. We usually don't promote it because it's on the same channel as that, so we just figured people already knew about it. But if you're watching this or listening and you want to check out some Dungeons & Dragons in space, check out our show Better Than Heroes. It streams every Monday night, 7 o'clock Pacific. It's a lot of fun. Anything I forgot, Harlan?
No, that's it. I'm if there was a couple questions that didn't get answered. If you all have questions, feel free to tweet them at us or Keith, and we'll connect you all. Say hey, and
sorry, we hogged the question. Sorry, Chad.
I'm just excited. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for hanging out.
Thanks
with
a bunch.
us. Yeah, and everybody go buy Keith's book. All right.
Both of them. Bye.
All right. See y'all.
Take
Thank
care.
you.